Migration is a well-known phenomenon in West Africa. People have always been on the move, mainly to look for economic opportunity. In the wake of violent crises in Côte d'Ivoire, Mali, and Nigeria, many, however, have been displaced against their will. So, which instruments of migration governance work? What is the relevant normative framework, and how does that relate to the situation on the ground? What are the perspectives of international, of regional organizations, national agencies, and certainly not the least, local civil society groups? What are the long-term effects of forced migration? Do displaced persons pose a security risk? I am excited to see such a distinguished panel convened tonight to discuss these questions.
Let me just outline briefly two initiatives or projects which the German government supports in a sense here in Nigeria. The Safe School Initiative, which was initiated by the former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown against the background of the abduction of the Chibok girls last year. The objective of this initiative is to ensure the education of children in the three federal states of Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe, which are most affected by Boko Haram. Another project I would like to highlight is a project of the IOM, which will give psychosocial support to displaced persons in northeast Nigeria, mainly in Borno. The German government is well aware that such a limited project will not change the difficult situation of displaced persons as a whole, but it is a sign that the German government considers the situation as serious, and it shows the readiness for commitment.
I'll give each of our panelists a brief minute or two to say a word about forced displacement.
One of the major causes is, of course, we know the insecurity in the Northeast. Another is also, surprisingly, of course, is forceful evictions from houses. So you have forceful evictions in Abuja, you have in Port Harcourt, you have in Lagos. So some people are actually, they become displaced because their houses have been confiscated. Then you also have displacements as a result of floods that took place some years back and what have you. But of course, the major one that is always known and everybody is aware of is the insecurity in the Northeast. Then you also have forced displacement in areas like the Middle Belt, where you have people displaced because of ethnic and religious crises that have been happening.
I think at the regional level, we can relate it to, let's say, crisis, being humanitarian crisis, natural catastrophes, but also mainly when you talk about displacement refugees in West Africa, you relate it directly to conflict, being internal conflict or conflict among member states. But mainly, what we suffer, what we are observing in the region is that all these political crises, serious tension, you are thinking during the introduction, they are reference to the elections. And it appears more and more that election time also is a time for kind of displacement because crisis erupts just after election, especially when the results are pronounced.
What issues of human security has on displacement?
Human security is two concepts. Is to be out of fear and out of need.
If you look at states like in the Middle Belt, and particularly talking about Plateau State, you have IDPs that have moved from other parts of the Northeast into Plateau State. And one of the very challenging issues there is lack of available resources to cater for them. Then there's this sense of tension between host communities and IDPs. Then, of course, issues of other human rights issues, if I can also come into that. If there's no provision for you to vote where you are, it's also a violation of your own rights.
I know your experience is more on the national level, so it would be interesting to know how NEMA gathers its data. Maybe I'll play a little bit of the devil's advocate here because there's been some criticism about figures and conflicting figures between, on the national level in particular, and then refugees from Nigeria in bordering countries between NEMA and UNHCR, for example. So it would be interesting if you could clarify that and probably talk about some of the frameworks in place.
You will agree with me that since the crisis in the Northeast, it has been very difficult to respond to the people that are displaced. And I can make bold that no agency of the government or of the United Nations has a better data today than NEMA. The reason is this: when there is crisis of such nature, the United Nations, they have security level. There are places they will never allow their staff to go. And who do go there? We go there. We go because we have a collaboration with the military. And we go to identify the people that are displaced.
For years, I was working on the small arms issues and the related securities. And you see many figures of arms being in circulation in West Africa. And sometimes when you see the number, and you know the population we have in West Africa, you think, how can the number is too high in terms of statistics? But I don't want to say blame NGOs, research departments, or the state. The same way our colleagues was doubting about UN figures, somebody like me can doubt on the statistics he's giving. But I think this is not the most important. Even if it's one IDP, the issue is how to resolve the problem.
What kind of conditions are there to protect women in camps? Because we know there are certain levels of insecurity in some of these camps. And lastly, probably the youth as well. And what kind of solutions you think need to be put in place to protect them?
I think for women, of course, women and children belong to the vulnerable groups. So it's not always, one would always wish for more to be done, yes, in the camps. And as I said, I was able to visit one of the camps in Nigeria, and it was very not pleasant at all. Of course, there are children, there are women that have babies, young babies. There are women that are now widowed. Of course, the husband's not there. And then, of course, facilities are not really available. There was one particular person that told me within the camps that they're tired of getting food. They're tired of getting soup. They want to go back home. So they're not interested in you bringing bags of rice or oil. They just said, we want to go back home. So for them, I think there's need for whatever policy, whatever arrangement is done nationally, there's need for, I don't know how it will be done, possibly, but there's need for participation of some of these IDPs in development of such policies.
Nigeria, we have just 800,000. Most of these people live outside the camps. So I don't know if your figure covers both the people in the camp and those outside the camps.
You can't get an accurate figure. If you go during the time of feeding, you will see large number. After feeding, they move away because they are actually not displaced. They have been displaced already, their parents have abandoned them and put them. Yeah, they are not just people. That is the fact.
Is there any framework that tries to look at the issue of public administration? Because it's public administration that delivers services. In fact, if public administration is effective, then when there is natural disaster, the response will be better.
We have neglected to take care of the people, and that's what's leading to what we have today. And that leads to internally displaced people. That's number one. Number two, you only respond, and that's what we are doing. We respond to such situations. Number three, Nigerians are different. Nigerians don't want to live in the camp. Mrs. Megeri confirming. Go to Kenya today, you will see people have been in the camp for the past over 10 years. Not Nigerians. Nigerians don't want to live in the camp. I want to go back home.
Then, of course, you have competition for other types of things. Now, you talked about what could be done for youths. I think one of the things definitely is to engage youths in doing different types of things, like within those camps, maybe engage them to be more productive and doing all kinds of things that will make them more productive rather than being in those camps. And I know that some of them have been engaged in doing lots of election issues have been done in Plateau State. I'm aware of that. Some people go, some small NGOs do some discussions with youths in order to definitely avoid any likelihood of conflicts, because there are lots of agitations going on.
2 years ago, we began working on what we called the model for national disaster management agencies. And that is complete. It has been validated by all member states. And what we're saying here is this. God forbid there is a crisis in country A, in West Africa. We do not expect that in all instances, ECOWAS as an institution will have to deploy people to that country. We do that, and I'll talk about it under operations. But we do believe that if there's some comparability, interoperability is the word, between what country A and country B does, then it's possible for country B to send in support to country A. And I'm glad to say that NEMA has actually been doing that with various West African countries in various situations. Now, it will be difficult if the subject of disaster management, for example, is not treated at the same priority level and with the same emphasis on things like institutions, funding, personnel, capacity building in the various countries. So that's one of the things we've dealt with in the area of the model for disaster management.
Sustainable solutions. What do you think? How can we ensure solutions that take into consideration both the grassroots level, the national level, regional level, and ensure that there's a long-term perspective towards addressing the issue of human security?
Establishing or pursuing a culture of leadership and good governance at all levels.
Everybody here should please come in. If we want durable solution, we should educate the people.
I think it's not just to talk about it from the policy level, but also to look at it societally. And then also talking from the national level. If you want to address issues like this, there's need for interagency collaboration. I think that's one of the issues where we are having challenges with in Nigeria. Who is doing what? Where do we get data from? Is it, okay, NEMA has a data. We also have other, Bureau of Statistics also has data. So there are different agencies that should be involved in it.
Prevention as a broad, if I refer to what I said, relating IDPs and refugees to conflict and crisis. When I say prevent, that means that if as much as we prevent crisis, conflict, there's a chance to prevent this to happen.